Angela, I remember that, you know, and I think it depends on the reporting year. So some of the CETAs are reporting, as we know, from January to December. So an April report is absolutely fine. But to try and do it all in 1 month is it's a big challenge. And certainly people with a large organization, it's a nightmare.
Absolutely.
Okay. I think most people are in the room. Cool. Well, welcome everybody. As you know, this week we're having a panel conversation. We've asked 3 of our regional chairs to lead the panel conversation. The issue that's driven this panel conversation is the real concerns that people have expressed about the mandatory grant process. If you were sitting on the WhatsApp group at all, you will have seen how chaotic the process seems to have been this year, and even more so than in previous years. And there's been a call from our members to do whatever we can as a professional body to try and get improvements to the process. So our reason then for inviting you to a panel conversation is to try and get clarity on what the real issues are, try and unpack the issues so that we can use that in our representations to government. And in particular, as you know, we did a mandatory grant survey last year. Our argument, our lobbying to government is going to be a lot more powerful if we can offer them some quantitative data, not just some comments, not just a position paper, but some quantitative data out of a survey. So we're going to use whatever ideas get raised in this conversation to help us focus and refine that mandatory grant survey. And when that survey comes out later on this year, please give it your attention. Last year was the first year we really focused on that survey. We did get some very good participation, but I think we could very easily get double the number of people commenting. And that will really add a lot more weight to whatever we have to say to government. We are a professional body in this area. They should be listening to us. But we need, I think, a bit of vuma to convince them that it's the right thing. So our 3 panelists are regional chairs. They all have a lot of experience in working with mandatory grant reporting, some from a corporate side, some from an independent SDF side. So I'm going to hand over to the panelists and ask them to raise the issues as they see them. And Morena, can we start with you?
100%. Morning, everybody. I'm working with 11 CETAs, okay? And all of these 11 CETAs ask different information. So what I've done quickly this morning, I've prepared a list. And it's maybe something that we quickly can just go through, if you don't mind. And then maybe you can just add, or if there's anything else you want to add, maybe just put it in a chat box, or just if there's opportunity for everyone to speak. I don't know, Andy. Then we can just put it in chat box.
Our normal format, because otherwise it gets too chaotic. So please do engage with us. Please put your comments in the chat box. This is not intended to be a group of people talking to you. It's intended to be a conversation. So please use it. And I will monitor the chat box as in previous sessions and bring it into the attention of the panel.
Okay. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so I've lodged down about 22 issues that I've came across. And you know what? I just feel that the CETA spend stakeholder monies, and why can't the stakeholders just have a say in, what information goes in, although we know what goes in, but it's everybody asks, or all CETAs ask different information, but it's the same outcome that we've got. So what I've lodged down was the different reporting periods, some January till December and others April until March, different info for capturing. The Excel spreadsheets that we send to clients, I mean, there's no way that I can send the lookup sheets to my clients and say to complete. They're not just going to do it. And that's actually a nightmare. Then the import templates that we receive for uploading, if you actually complete it and you know everything is correct and you upload it, you get, you get an error, but you don't know where's the error. You actually need to go and redo the whole sheet because you don't know where it is. Then some of these manuals are, I think, 60 or 70 pages long. I mean, for us to go through it, it's not worth it, really. Systems are not user-friendly. Then some CETAs require training evidence to be uploaded. That's really time-consuming because I've got a client who's doing a lot of training. I need to print all those attendance registers, upload them, and then import them. And sometimes it's not working. The bandwidth is not good enough for us.
Miranda, if I can just comment
Yes.
there, I wonder what on earth they actually do with that stuff.
No idea, because, for example, with Mesita, they do audits or inspections, whatever you want to call it, and then they ask the STF, listen, send me through what you uploaded on this and send me through the evidence. I mean, surely that is fine, but I really don't know what they do with it. I must tell you. Then some CETAs, okay, yes, the STF registration process. Some of them we need to register each year. Like with services CETA, you start the process all over again, upload the letter. Why? It will only change if I'm not the STF, and then the waiting period that you also got, if you uploaded that whole first section before you actually get to the WSP and ATR to upload. Then certain CETAs having own OFO codes. I don't find my OFO codes. I mean, goodness, everybody's got an accountant or the finance manager. It's not there. You need to find the nearest one. And often that I find, if I do have with the big companies over 50, on their training committee meetings, they ask me, okay, who's this person? Who's that? Why did you change that? I'm sorry, because that is what it is. We need to find the nearest one, the one that fit.
Rena, I think that if I can just comment on that as well, I think my question with that is, so when the CETA wants an OFO code and then the additional digits that provide for a specialization, what on earth are they doing with that information? Why do some CETAs ask that? And it's critically important, they must have it, but somehow it's not important to the other CETAs. So there's not a logic that makes sense to me at how the CETAs are actually handling this.
Yes, I totally agree. And then some CETAs ask BE certificates. Some we don't have, but you have to tick it. So I'm somehow just uploading the STF registration document because they don't have a BE certificate. Then some CETAs ask us the EMP-SA document. For what reason? I mean, yeah. Then the biggest question I've got, some of the BE verification companies ask me the acknowledgement versus the accepted versus the approved. Some CETAs give us a acknowledgement, some CETAs give accepted, and some approved letters. They're not all the same. So, and the BE wants an approved letter from the CETA. Okay, then the OFO codes, I find sometimes if you do get the drop-down boxes from the CETA for the imports, you sit there and let's say I've got 100 people, I need to find that number. So it's not in the description and you can't search. You actually go through all these lists, or you have another screen and you open, you see, okay, fine, that's the number, and then you scroll down until you get the number. I mean, that's really time consuming. And then what was the other? The info caption is not reflecting the final report that we receive. For example, Mesita, all the information that you ask, it was a management course, what it was it on the job training? You put all those information in, but the actual report that you get back is the employment equity report. What must we do with that? And that will come back to, if the BE verification company asks us the, where's the critical skills that you actually listed? It's not showing there. I need to send my Excel spreadsheet, make it a column and say, okay, it is been done, it is listed. But you don't actually see it in the final report that you get back from the CETAs.
And it makes it very difficult to audit,
Yes.
You can't easily work out whether it's garbage in, garbage out, because it's information not easily accessible.
I think there's a lot garbage in and garbage out.
Yeah,
yes.
Comment from Sylvia Hammond.
Yes.
Different years for the OFO codes, and also the services CETA have a two-part process. The first has to be completed before you can move to the second. It will not accept unless you complete the hard to fill vacancies. If you
Yes.
don't have a hard to fill vacancy, then you have to just make one up so that you can
Yes.
move on to complete. So this
I agree.
bizarre
It's garbage in,
requirements.
garbage out.
Yeah.
Definitely. Definitely. I totally agree. Okay. Then, okay, some CETAs provide extensions, others don't. My other question I had on that, wasn't there some sort of a regulation or a rule that say we need to physically apply for extension? You cannot give a blanket extension. That's just a note somewhere.
Well, I think the question is, what does the minister actually require? Because the CETAs are quite quick to tell us that it's a government requirement, when actually might be not be a government requirement, it's just their decision.
Yeah, yeah.
There's also a comment from Michael Tiger. There is no standard percentage across the CETAs of training records that are required to be submitted. It appears to be an arbitrary percentage, which I think is, yeah, I think that's accurate, Michael.
Yeah, correct. Okay, then the availability of staff during this period. You can't get hold of them by phone, by email, by cell phone. If you even visit their offices are closed. Really? Anyway, okay. Then
By the way, Miranda, just
yes.
to add in, the local government CETA shut all of their offices in the middle of last month for basically a week while they went off to do a session away from the office. So in the middle of the last month of submitting, they disappeared for a week.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that brings us back to the turnaround times. If you've got a query, nobody answers you. So yeah, all right. Then, you know, the DG window periods differ. So some is April until March, some doesn't have any DGs. I mean, I've applied for services CETA for DG and you don't get anything. I mean, for years now. And they're one of the biggest CETAs. I don't know if they need to split some of the, you know, sections and give it to other CETAs or make up another one. That's just a note there. Then the criteria that we apply for discretionary grants, the amounts that we apply for. Why is W&R CETA ask for, let's say, a motor mechanic, and they do have it, you know, in their field. They give you 20 grand and CETA will give you 206 grand. So that also differ. Then the mandatory grant payouts period. Some CETAs is paying quarterly and some is paying monthly. I mean, my question is, who's sitting with the interest if you're paying quarterly? The company's not getting it, surely. But yeah, okay. Then, you know, the critical skills not listed in the final report. Okay, we've done that previously. The inter-CETA transfers, that's taking up months. I've got a client that I've done it. I think I've seen it how many times through. It's not been done. It's still a small company. They should come back from services CETA to CETA. I cannot find OFO codes. I cannot find the information on services CETA that I need to complete. It should, but they just don't transfer these companies. And then on the WSP, I've got a query. Some of the CETAs ask you if you need to put on, you know, you want to apply for funding also, you need to put in the name, the surname, the ID number, etc. of the person. I don't have that as yet. My CETA is fine. We don't have to put it in because they ask you, you know, give a number and the, you know, let's say business administration NQ level 2 or 3 or whatever. But the others ask your name and surname. I can't put it in. This year I can't even put in bursaries because the bursaries wasn't listed with my CETA. So I couldn't even apply for funding for that. So yeah, and then
especially if you're running projects for people who are unemployed,
yes.
you start to source, recruit, select, go through that entire process. And if you're going to do that beforehand, just so that you can have the names, surnames, and ID numbers, you may be creating an unrealistic expectation for these individuals. So it shouldn't be a prerequisite. It should be a name. You could apply EAP targets if you needed to, but it shouldn't ask for information to that extent. I agree with you completely. So it limits the amount of training that you're committing to.
Yeah, definitely. And then my last opinion was just, I think we need to go back to that all companies pay skills development levies. Not, you know, those that's been exempted. I mean, the big companies, they are paying, but they're also catering for the small companies, the projects, etc., etc. Why can't we go back to all companies paying SDR? And then everybody can benefit.
Thanks, Morena.
All right.
Angela, from where you're sitting, so I think you have a massive corporate perspective. What are you seeing as the main issues that we should be addressing with government?
So Andy, what I've summarized them up as from my perspective in the corporate environment is timing, and it's not only WSP/ATR timing. We were discussing before we began the actual chat. We used to be able to report in June of every year, and that was far better from a corporate perspective, because in the January, February, March, we are still actually doing our performance appraisals. We are deciding what development plans we are putting together for our organization and what have you. And with dealing with 32,000 people on the ground, and that takes quite something to gather up the data. So I can't realistically between March and the end of April gather up all of that information and then sort of translate it into something that the CETA can actually report on and understand. So the timing to me is an issue from our side. Also, if you look at what we're being asked for, the value add on the report itself, I don't understand how it is adding value to the CETA processes. Perhaps yes, from a funding perspective, to a certain extent, yes, that adds value. But from actually the core, the spirit of the whole process is actually to identify what we are needing as a sector and then help us to attain that. It's not only from a funding perspective, yes, but also help us to close those gaps on the skills gaps that we have identified. Now, if you're looking at the way that we have to report, we are reporting from a past perspective on what are our skills priorities and how did we match up what we have trained on against those skills priorities. So surely we should be identifying the future skills priorities. What about the future focus? They're restricting our focus on this list of skills priorities. Sometimes it's not even a skills priority, it's an actual occupation. So there's a sort of a gray area in terms of, are we identifying the occupation or are we identifying a skill? Because there's a very big difference in that. As an example, we have a critical skill in the bank with management and leadership. But from an in-CETA perspective, which OFO code essentially must I match that to? It's an overarching skill that is required, yes. But that doesn't come through in the in-CETA reports. So how do you actually, well, you obviously get your skills gaps listed at the beginning of your report and what have you, and your hard to fill vacancies. But I just don't see the value of aligning all of our courses to essentially an occupation. It doesn't make any sense. Then from a sort of, because we do have smaller entities, I'm reporting on 9 levy numbers in total, and one or two of them are regarded as small or medium. And then it's the sharing of personal info, which makes me very uncomfortable. So that is one issue that I have, but it is relatively small considering my volume that I'm dealing with. And then we also, when we were discussing the planning for this chat, what happened to that discussion on the 20% versus 50% mandatory grant? That sort of just gone very quiet. And yeah, as far as we're concerned, we should have actually gone back to a 50% mandatory grant return. So yes, agree with all of Morena's points, but yeah, those are my pain points. Thank you.
Can we take a couple of the comments from the chat box? So there's been quite a few comments, so bear with me. Michael, target no standard percentage across the CETAs of training records, have we covered that? Sylvia says, to be fair, I had very good contact with services CETA. Michael, again, why do some CETAs have an automatic extension of the WSP deadline and others require a written request from the stakeholder? The quarterly mandatory grant payments are governed by legislation and regulations, so how can the CETAs deviate from that? Also, Sylvia, again, also end of tax year for the payroll, okay? Ingrid, if each CETA asks for different information in a totally different manner, how on earth can the data sent across a DHET make the slightest bit of sense? Interesting comment. Vilma, exactly what Elaine stated, misleading expectations for learners and STPs. Delayed rollouts have had a negative impact on the training interventions, where large numbers were committed to, yet when implementing, it's a fraction of the numbers. The STPs suffer here. John Arneson, Angela makes so much sense. CETA should fit their timing to the levy payer rather than their own timetable. Good comment, John. Thank you. Agreed. Renelle, also agree with Angela, should be 50%. Sylvia, excellent point, Angela, on leadership skills. The quality of school leavers is poor and they're not work ready. So leadership and management of the potential of those young people is critical. Michael Tigran, each CETA appears to have different questions posed on the impact assessment for training implemented. How does this information translate in terms of the 21 sector skills plans? And then Renelle, my entities are not even interested in applying for the 20%. So it's really saying that the proportion of business that's actively engaging by the mandatory grants is becoming more and more skewed and is excluding the smaller organizations more and more. Elaine, so we've got 8 minutes left. What have we not said, Elaine?
I think everything has been covered very extensively, but I do think it would be extremely valuable if our members or our audience can continue asking questions, because those are the questions that we then use to put together our argument at the end of the day. So if there are things that you don't understand or things that need to be raised or issues that need to be addressed, and it doesn't matter even if they are duplicated, we need them to keep coming in. I think Andy mentioned right at the beginning, the more input we have from our audience, from our members, from SDFs all over South Africa, the more leverage we have in our argument. While I do think that a lot has been covered, and I think there's a lot more detail that can go into it. I think that speaking to each CETA on each of these topics, they're all going to have their own answer, because each of the CETAs think that their system is the best and what they're doing is the best. But they're coming from an academic reporting perspective and not from an industry perspective. And I think that it's important then from an industry perspective that we weigh in with regard to what information it is that we're actually prepared to give and what would actually be useful and specific to industry, as opposed to them dictating. That they're not paying the levies. We're paying the levies as industry. So we should be the ones who are determining what that report ultimately should look like, because the outcomes of that report then again influence our industries. Yes, Michael, I agree. Definitely should be an agenda item at NEDLAC. And do you know what was it BUSA?
What's your question?
Who took the argument?
And Miranda nodding her head.
Yes, it is.
Okay, all right, because it was them that won the 50% for us. So I think it's important that we follow up on things like that. At the end of the day, we're complaining and being complacent and not doing anything. And I think that it is important that the ASDSA takes this fight forward.
Yeah. So some comments from the chat box. Sylvia, we need to ask what the percentage is now participating, because we're all reporting companies dropping out. So that I think is going to be a very useful survey question, try and get a handle on that. Angelique has put in an email address. So if you've got comments that you'd like to be considered for the design of the survey, please send them to that excode@asdsa.org.za. Michael Tiger's comment, Elaine's already referred to. Sharon, we need a task team to put together the survey and subsequent report. And John, I see the following challenges: need one set of practices, processes, and systems across all the 21 seaters. The 20% mandatory grant is resulting in small and medium levy payers not bothering to claim mandatory grants, which is a disaster. And John, I have a lot of sympathy for what you're saying. If we could get the back offices of all of the seaters to be centralized and run it in the way the services seaters run, where they have different chambers, so we have one version of the mandatory grant reporting, one set of discretionary grant windows for claiming, one set of making application, and then let the chambers help focus how that funding gets spent. That makes a lot more sense to me. And Sylvia, again, this appears to be getting worse every year, not better. And I think you're right, Sylvia. I think if I look at how upset and angry people were in that WhatsApp group with the way things were unfolding this year, and I echo it. I mean, I work with about 6 or 7 different seaters. And the process this year was even more chaotic than last year. Colleagues, we've got 4 minutes.
I agree, and it cannot be a checkbox. It cannot be a checkbox exercise. If CETA wants meaningful data, we cannot be doing this just for BE in terms of what we're reporting on, because submitting a WSP is a BE requirement. We cannot do it without correctly and effectively identifying skills gaps in the organizations as well as in the industry. It cannot just be a compliance-driven process. It does need to be meaningful, especially, and Angela raised this point, because we're giving them so much information.
And so much money.
Yes.
Mirena's comment, I think yours is a good one, Mirena. If it wasn't for BBBE, some of the clients would not even complete the mandatory grant process. And I think that's true. Michael Tiger, EE annual reporting to DOL and employment is conducted on a standard system. So why is it so complex for DVET? Michelle, we should understand how to access the pivotal and discretionary grants too. There's also a concern when we follow the rules to apply for grants and the rules change. The opening of windows at Christmas, exclamation mark. Colleagues, any final comments? I think there's a lot of ideas that we can build into our mandatory grant survey. Remember, this is just to focus on the mandatory grant. That's what the survey will address. I think we've got some really good ideas as to who we should also engage with on the survey and on any position paper we put together. We can address government. We need to think about, and I think Flora's had some very excellent comments as to some of the players we might also engage with in government. But let's also be spending time lobbying with BUSA and other bodies like that to get support for changing this process. Angelique has put in the link for CPD points, so please use that, everyone. Angela, Mirena, Elaine, we have 2 minutes. Any final comments from anyone?
And I think from my side, it's very important that if the survey gets out, don't just see it as something, oh, I'm not going to complete it, because these are the things that we're actually working on that we can take further. I think there will be some changes in the document, that came out, in these things that we've discussed just now. But it's very, very important that everybody who's completing a WSP and ATR on behalf of a client. We need your voice to take it further. We need that information. We cannot fight if we don't have your information. That's how I see it.
Thanks, Mirena. I completely support what you're saying. Angela, Elaine, you've got 30 seconds.
You go, Elaine. You didn't have much time after my ramble.
No. I've said everything that I needed to say. Both you and Mirena highlighted the issues very comprehensively, as well as our audience. So thank you so much. Leverage.
Colleagues, I think we're on time. Thank you so much for joining us today, and thanks again to our panel for unpacking these issues. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Angela. Cheers, Angela. Bye, Mirena.